Picture the most beautiful building ever constructed. Now fill it with human waste. Add 4,000 people living inside walls made of marble, silk and gold leaf, none of whom have access to running water, most of whom relieve themselves in stairwells, and all of whom are wearing wigs so heavily powdered that the air around them is permanently white. Add the smell of 10,000 candles burning every hour, the smell of meat rotting in kitchens a quarter mile from the table it's meant to serve, the smell of perfume, gallons of it, oceans of it, entire fortunes of it, deployed as a weapon against a stench so profound that foreign ambassadors wrote home to warn their governments. That's Versailles, the most magnificent palace in human history, the physical embodiment of absolute power, the building that redefined what it meant to be wealthy, to be powerful, to be royal. A structure so impossibly, breathtakingly, insanely beautiful that grown men wept when they first walked through its hall of mirrors. And underneath all of it, soaked into the marble, pressed into the curtains, embedded in the wigs and the waistcoats and the silk stockings of every single person who walked those corridors, the unmistakable, inescapable, absolutely democratic smell of 10,000 human beings refusing to deal with the most basic biological realities. There's a reason the Sun King wore so much perfume. There's a reason gloves soaked in scent were the most prized gift at court. There's a reason Versailles had not one single functional bathroom, not one, in the entire palace, for 4,000 residents and another 10,000 visitors on feast days. No bathrooms, no plumbing, no drainage that worked. Nothing. The greatest palace in the world was, by the smell of it, something closer to the world's most elaborately decorated outdoor toilet. And tonight, we're going there. Not as tourists dragging through the hall of mirrors with an audio guide telling you about Louis XIV's ambitions. Not as historians reading footnotes about sanitation infrastructure in 17th century France. We're living it. We're arriving for the first time, young, ambitious, terrified, and completely unprepared for what the most glittering court in Europe actually smells like up close. Get comfortable. Here we go. Your eyes open to darkness. For a moment, half a second, maybe less, you don't know where you are. The noise is wrong. Too much of it. Too many kinds of it. Then the smell hits you, and you remember, you're at Versailles. This smell is the thing they never tell you about before you come. Everyone tells you about the Hall of Mirrors. Everyone tells you about the gardens, the fountains, the sheer impossible scale of the place. Nobody tells you about the smell. It's not one smell. It's a conversation between smells, layered and complex and deeply, profoundly wrong. The first layer is human sweat, not fresh sweat. Old sweat, days or weeks old, baked into clothing, that hasn't been properly washed since it was made. Wool holding on to moisture, linen yellowing at the collar, silk which can't be washed at all without destroying it, carrying the history of every body that's ever worn it. The second layer is hair powder, white, flour-based, applied in thick clouds every morning in dressing rooms throughout the palace. When 20,000 people powder their hair in the same building on the same morning, the air takes on a quality, floury, slightly sour, mixed with the pomade used to make the powder stick. Your nose is never quite free of it. The third layer is perfume. And here's where it gets complicated, because perfume at Versailles isn't decoration. It's armour. It's camouflage. It's the weapon everyone deploys against the ambient smell, creating a dense fog of competing fragrances, ambergris and civet and musk and rose and violet and orange blossom, all layered on top of each other, none of them quite winning, all of them contributing to a complexity that the word perfume doesn't really cover. The fourth layer, and this one you try not to think about, is excrement. Not everywhere, not at every moment, but present, always present, in certain stairwells, certain corridors, certain dark corners behind tapestries and under staircases, where a desperate courtier relieve themselves in the night, and where the servants haven't yet come with buckets and lime. Versailles was built with approximately 20 closets for sanitation purposes throughout the entire palace. 20 for 20,000 people. You do the math. The rest of it, all of the rest of it, went somewhere else. Chamber pots that were emptied out windows into the courtyards below, occasionally missing. Stone floors in stairwells that the light never quite reached. Corners that became, by silent mutual agreement, acceptable locations for personal business, and then by continued use became established locations, and then by long tradition became essentially permanent features of the palace that everyone knew about and nobody discussed. The courtiers who lived here, the genuinely powerful ones, the dukes and duchesses and princes and princesses who had actual apartments in the palace itself, they kept chamber pots in their rooms, obviously. They had servants whose literal job was to manage the chamber pot, to present it at the right moment, to remove it discreetly, to dispose of its contents without anyone of consequence having to acknowledge that any of this was happening. But in between, in the corridors and galleries and stairwells that everyone used to get everywhere, you were relying on your own navigation, your own judgment about when to breathe through your mouth, your own ability to step around the evidence of other people's necessity without breaking your stride or your expression, because expression matters enormously here, showing that you notice the smell, that you're troubled by it, that you find any aspect of Versailles less than perfect as that's weakness, that's provinciality, that's proof that you don't quite belong. The truly powerful people here seem genuinely not to notice it. Maybe they don't anymore. Maybe after enough years the nose simply gives up. Or maybe they're just better at pretending than you are. You're going to need to get better at pretending. Your name, for the purposes of this morning, is Philippe Auguste de Montclair. You're 23 years old. You've been at Versailles for 4 months, which is long enough to know where everything is, and short enough that you still sometimes stop in a corridor, caught by the light hitting a painting in a particular way, and forget what you were doing. You arrived in late autumn when the smell was manageable. Cold air has its advantages, and a cousin with a minor court position arranged an introduction that led to a position in the household of the Duc de Saint-Simon's circle, which is to say you are attached by a chain of introductions and obligations too complex to fully trace, to the edges of the court, not to the centre, not yet, but close enough to see the centre, close enough to observe, close enough to be observed, which is nearly as important. Your room is in the north wing, and when I say room, I need you to understand what that means at Versailles. The palace was designed at its core for exactly one person, Louis XIV, who will live and die having spent nearly his entire adult life within a few hundred meters of where you're currently lying. Everything else, every other room, every other apartment, every other closet-sized space allocated to every other human being in the building, was arranged in relation to that central fact. Proximity to the king is the fundamental currency here. Distance is poverty. Your room reflects your distance. It is approximately 4 meters by 5 meters. This is not a large room. This is a room that, by the standards of most European cities, would be considered a respectable space for storage. There is a bed, a good one actually, which you paid for yourself, as the furnishings of private apartments are the responsibility of their inhabitants. There is a table, there is a chair, there is a window that looks out onto the Cour de Marbre when the weather permits, and into a grey winter wall of fog for most of November through March. There is no fireplace. The fireplaces are in the better apartments, the ones belonging to people who matter more than you do. You have a small brazier that you keep burning through the cold months, feeding it charcoal that costs more than it should, and that the servants sometimes forget to replenish, which means some mornings you wake up in a room that is barely warmer than outside. This morning is not cold. This morning is July 1685, the feast of Louis XIV's reign, his 47th year, his 42nd on the throne, the Sun King at the height of his power, and the palace in July is something else entirely. You lie still for a moment after your eyes open, not ready yet to commit to the day. Your body is cataloguing its complaints. The mattress, despite being the best you could afford, has developed opinions about where your spine should be. Your neck is tight on the left side, the same side it's been tight on for 3 weeks, ever since you spent 5 hours standing in a particular posture in the Hall of Mirrors, waiting for an audience that kept being postponed. Your feet ache from yesterday, they always ache. Court life is standing life. You stand for hours, perfectly upright, in shoes that were designed to look magnificent, and were emphatically not designed with comfort in mind. Your heels are the size of thumbs. Fashion demands it. The red heels that mark you as someone with court access, someone who has presented themselves to the king, are 3 inches high and made of leather or a wooden form, and what they do to a human foot over the course of a 12-hour day is something no surgeon in France has yet properly documented, though several have expressed interest. You push yourself upright. The first physical sensation is the temperature of the air against your face. July air, warm already, though the sun has barely started its work on the stone walls. By afternoon, those walls will have absorbed enough heat to radiate it back through the night, making sleep in the north wing a sweaty, restless, shallow thing. The second sensation is the feel of the sheet under your hands as you push it aside. Linen, good quality linen, because you own exactly 3 luxury items: the bed, the sheets, and a coat that cost 4 months of your income and makes you look, at court functions, like you belong to a slightly higher social stratum than you actually do. The coat is doing a great deal of work. You sit on the edge of the bed. Your feet find the floor. The stone floor, which this morning is the temperature of a cool grave, which is actually pleasant against the bottoms of your feet after the warmth of the sheets. Your valet, you have 1 valet, which is the minimum respectable number of servants for a man of your station, is named Gaston. He is 38 years old, has worked at Versailles for 15 years, and knows more about navigating this palace than you will ever know. He is currently, by the sound of things, in the small antechamber beyond your door, moving around, making the quiet, purposeful sounds of someone who has been awake for some time and is waiting for you to catch up. Gaston. The door opens. He's already dressed, already carrying the basin of water you'll use to wash your face, already carrying the towel, already having managed in the 20 seconds between your voice and his appearance to arrange his face into an expression of alert readiness that suggests he has been awake and prepared for exactly this moment. Gaston is very good at his job. The water in the basin is cold, not cold because anyone forgot to heat it. Cold because heated water on a hot July morning is not refreshing. Cold because Gaston knows that you prefer it cold in summer. Cold because in the absence of any other form of temperature regulation in your life, a cold splash of water at the start of the day is something small and real you can control. You take the cloth from the edge of the basin, dip it, wring it, press it against your face, and here is your morning hygiene. Here, this cloth, this water, this brief contact between linen and skin. This is what passes for washing at Versailles in 1685. Let me explain, because this is the thing that requires explanation. The concept of bathing, full immersion in water, the way you are probably thinking of it right now, is not absent from 17th century France. It exists. There are bathtubs at Versailles. There are dedicated bathing apartments. The king has one, fitted with a copper tub large enough to sit in, lined with linen, scented with herbs and flowers. But here is what the physicians of 1685 believe about bathing. It will kill you, not metaphorically, not as a mild concern. They believe, with the full weight of medical consensus behind them, that immersing your body in water opens the pores, that open pores admit disease, that the air of France in the 17th century, already full of miasma, of bad humours, of the invisible emanations that cause plague and fever and death, will enter through those opened pores and destroy you from the inside. The physicians of Versailles, the best physicians in France, arguably the best in Europe, believe this. The king believes this. The court believes this. And so, for Louis XIV, a full bath is a significant medical event, something that happens perhaps 4 times a year, something that is preceded by medical consultation, accompanied by heated herbs and careful monitoring, and followed by a period of rest to allow the pores to close again before exposure to the open air. What happens in between? Linen. This is the theory. This is actually a coherent theory, internally consistent with everything 17th century medicine understands about the body. Linen, being a plant fibre with particular properties, absorbs the impurities that come out of the body. Sweat, oil, the bad humours that the body naturally expels. The linen absorbs all of it. The solution to hygiene is therefore not water, dangerous, but the regular change of linen. Clean linen against the skin, multiple changes per day for the wealthy. The whiteness of the linen demonstrating its cleanliness, demonstrating by extension the cleanliness of the person wearing it. Louis XIV changes his shirt 3 times a day, every day. 3 shirts, fresh every time. White, fine linen, carefully laundered by teams of washerwomen in outbuildings specifically dedicated to the purpose. This is why the laundry operation at Versailles employs hundreds of people. This is why fresh linen is one of the most closely managed resources in the palace. This is why the whiteness of your collar, the crispness of your cuffs, the absolute absence of any visible stain on anything visible. This is what cleanliness means here. This is what it looks like. Not water, linen. You understand the theory. You've read the physicians. You believe it in the abstract because everyone believes it. But on a July morning in Versailles, standing in a room that smells of accumulated days and the faint sourness of your own sleeping body, pressing a cold cloth against your face and calling it a wash, there is some small part of you that wonders. Gaston has laid out your clothes for the morning. This is not a simple operation. Your clothes are not simple. Getting dressed at Versailles is not a matter of pulling on your breeches and heading out the door. It is a process that takes, for a man of your station, somewhere between 30 minutes and an hour, depending on the occasion, and the care required. Let's start from the skin. Your undershirt, chemise, is fresh today. Clean from the laundry, the linen slightly stiff from drying. This is the important layer. The layer that will do the actual work of managing your body's chemistry for the next several hours. The layer that will absorb everything your body produces and carry it away from your skin. You pull it on. The fabric is cool against your chest, your arms, already beginning to warm to your body temperature, already beginning to do its job. Over that, the waistband breeches, wool, because silk breeches are for formal occasions, and this morning you have an appointment to observe, not attend, observe, the king's morning ritual, and the dress requirements for observation are slightly less strict than for participation. Slightly. The breeches are fitted close around the thigh, flaring slightly below the knee. The wool is heavy. It's July. By noon, you will have sweated through everything. Stockings next. White silk, because white silk is visible, and white silk shows any imperfection. A slight irregularity in the knit, a single pulled thread, these things will be noticed. Gaston rolls them up your calves, attaches them to the points of your breeches with practised efficiency. His hands are warm and dry. Professional hands. The coat. The coat is the thing you spent 4 months of your income on, and it is worth every livre. Deep blue, almost black, embroidered at the cuffs and collar with silver thread, in a pattern that suggests wealth without scream in it. The fabric is a heavy silk blend that holds its shape beautifully. The cut makes your shoulders look broader, your waist narrower. The tailor who made it has also made coats for 3 actual dukes and 1 cardinal, which is not something he told you when you were negotiating the price, but which became apparent afterward when you saw the coats in question. You did not negotiate hard enough. Gaston helps you into it. The coat settles on your shoulders with the weight of good fabric. He smooths the back, adjusts the fall of the sleeves, steps back to look. The cravat, monsieur. The cravat, white linen of course, folded and tied at the throat in a knot that is specific to the period, to the court, to the social level you're performing. Too loose and you look careless, too tight and you look provincial. Gaston has tied this cravat approximately 100 times now. He knows exactly what it should look like. He ties it, adjusts, ties again. Last, the wig. Your actual hair is cut short, not shaved but short beneath the wig. The wig is a substantial piece of architecture. Dark brown curls cascade into your shoulders. It cost more than the coat, which tells you something about the economics of this world. Gaston places it on your head, makes minute adjustments to its position, steps back. Now the powder. Gaston takes a large cloth and drapes it over your shoulders, protecting the coat. Then he takes the powder puff, a large soft pad filled with white powder, and begins to apply it. The powder goes on in careful puffs, your wig, your eyebrows, a faint dusting on the skin of your face. Not heavily, you're not going to a formal evening function. Just enough. Just the baseline. The powder rises in clouds. You close your eyes. Hold your breath. The smell of it, flower-based, mixed with some scent you've never been able to precisely identify. Something floral and also something slightly rancid that you try not to examine too closely, fills the air around you. This is the closest thing to a shower you will have today. When the cloth comes off your shoulders, there's a fine white dusting on the dark fabric beneath. Gaston removes this with a small brush. His expression throughout is one of complete professional neutrality, which after 4 months you've learned to read as a kind of affection. You're ready, monsieur. You look at yourself in the mirror. The mirror is small, a real mirror, glass-backed, which is expensive. The image it shows you is a young man of apparent quality, dark coat, white cravat, powdered wig, silk stockings, red heels. You look entirely like what you're trying to be. You smell, beneath the powder and the slight remnant of last night's vetiver cologne, like a human being who hasn't properly bathed in 3 weeks. But that's all right. So does everyone else. You leave your room at 7:15. The corridor outside your door is already busy. This is Versailles. The corridors are always busy. The palace never truly sleeps. The servants have been working since 4 in the morning, candles lit in the kitchens, fires started in the important rooms, water heated for the important people's washing, the vast machinery of royal hospitality already in motion before most of its beneficiaries have opened their eyes. The corridor smells. On a good day, the smell is candle smoke from last night's sconces, the faint ghost of powder and perfume left by everyone who passed through yesterday, wood polish from the floors, and underneath all of that the persistent baseline note of people. Many people, living closely together for extended periods in a building that was designed to make an impression, not to ventilate. Today is not a good day in terms of smell. Some event last night. You can see the evidence on the floor near the stairwell. You move past it without looking directly at it. Has contributed to the baseline. The footmen who clean the corridors will have been here already, or should have been, but the footmen are spread thin and some corridors get more attention than others. North wing corridors get less. You walk with purpose, which is the correct way to walk at Versailles. Nobody who is important walks slowly. Nobody who is important saunters, or dawdles, or looks around in an obvious way. You walk as though you are going somewhere specific for reasons that are too significant to explain to anyone who might ask. This is partly performance and partly genuine. You're going somewhere. The ritual of the king's morning rising is happening in 45 minutes, and you want a position from which to see it, but mostly its armour, purposefulness as protective colouring, down the main staircase. The staircase is marble. 2 enormous flights, meeting at a landing where a painting of something allegorical hangs above you in a frame that probably cost more than your entire apartment. The marble is cold under the thin soles of your heeled shoes. The sound is hard and sharp. Every step announces itself. This is deliberate. Everything at Versailles is deliberate. The marble floors that amplify every footfall, making anonymity difficult. The mirrors that multiply every image, making privacy impossible. The sight lines that run the length of entire wings, so that from certain points you can see 50, 60, 80 meters of corridor stretching away, populated with figures moving, through light and shadow. You're always being seen here, always potentially observed. The king designed it this way, or rather Levaux designed it, and Lebrun decorated it, and Lenôtre laid out the gardens, and Mansart built the Hall of Mirrors, and hundreds of other hands and minds constructed the physical reality of Versailles. But the intention was Louis XIV's. The idea that visibility itself is power, that the ability to see and be seen is the fundamental mechanism of control. The court functions because everyone can see everyone else. Because every social transaction, every negotiation, every moment of favour granted or withheld happens in public, in these corridors and galleries and salons, watched by everyone who passes. Privacy at Versailles is essentially impossible, and they built it that way on purpose. The king's bedchamber is in the centre of the palace, literally, geometrically. The bedroom of Louis XIV is positioned at the exact geographic centre of the palace, of Versailles, aligned with the sunrise, with the central axis of the gardens, with the road that runs south to Paris. Everything radiates from that room. The hall of mirrors, the state apartments, the gardens, the canals, all of it arranged around the fact that the king sleeps here, that the king wakes up here, that from this central point his attention radiates outward and everything in range is illuminated by it. The metaphor of the Sun King is not a metaphor, it is architectural fact. To get to the king's bedchamber, you pass through the salon de l'œil de bœuf, the salon of the bullseye, named for the oval window in the ceiling that admits a shaft of light, which is currently packed. And when I say packed, I need you to understand what that means in a room that is theoretically a waiting room for a bedroom. There are perhaps 80 people in here, 80 people in court dress, which means 80 people wearing wigs and powder and elaborate coats and panniers and heeled shoes, all pressing toward the door of the bedchamber with the quiet, disciplined, absolutely ferocious purpose of people competing for something worth more than money. The smell is significant. 80 bodies in court dress, all of them having gone through versions of the same ritual you just performed. Cloth, powder, perfume, and all of them generating heat in a room that wasn't designed for 80 people and doesn't have a window open. The competing perfumes create something complex and not entirely pleasant. Ambergris fighting with rosewater, fighting with civet musk, fighting with the underlying human notes that no perfume quite eliminates. You take your place near the back of the room. Near the back because that's where you belong, at the back because the people near the front are dukes and princes and senior members of the household staff whose right to that position has been established over years or decades of attendance. The man near the door with the yellow coat is the Duc d'Aumont, Premier Gentleman of the Bedchamber. The one beside him is the Comte de Brionne. The woman, yes, women attend the morning rising too, certain of them, the ones with established relationships with the household, is a duchess whose name you should know and keep, almost knowing. Everyone knows everyone here, except you. You know some of them. You're learning the rest. A door opens, not the main door, a side door, barely visible in the panelling, used by the valets who manage the inner mechanisms of the king's mourning. One of them appears, a man of perhaps 50, wearing the king's livery, his face carrying the particular expression of someone whose importance derives entirely from proximity to something much more important. He nods to the Duc d'Aumont. Some silent communication passes. The room, which has been producing the low, continuous sound of 80 people making careful conversation, quiets. This is the moment. The lever begins. The word lever means, literally, rising. The king's lever is the ritual by which Louis XIV gets out of bed. It is the most precisely choreographed performance in Europe, a performance that has been refined over 40 years into something so specific, so detailed, so rigidly defined that every participant knows their exact position, their exact movement, their exact moment. It runs as smoothly as a clock attended by 80 nobles competing for the right to hand a man his shirt. The door to the bedchamber opens, people move, not randomly, specifically, precisely, in an order that has been established and memorized. The Duc d'Aumont goes first, because that is his office. The first physician, the first surgeon, the premier valet de chambre, who has actually been in the room all night, sleeping on a cot near the door, technically on duty in case the king needed anything. You're not moving, you're watching. This is the extent of your access this morning. You can see through the open door at a distance of perhaps 15 meters, a slice of what's happening inside. You can see the canopy of the royal bed, an enormous thing, blue and gold, the curtains richly embroidered, the whole structure rising to the ceiling on gilded posts. You can see the movement of figures around it. You can hear voices, the formal, prescribed phrases that the ceremony demands. But at this distance they blur into tone rather than words. The king is being awakened. Not in any sense you would recognize as awakening. Louis XIV does not simply wake up. He does not open his eyes and stumble toward a bathroom and splash water on his face. His waking is a passage through several distinct states, each attended by specific people. First, the premier valet draws back the curtain of the bed and says the phrase that has started Louis XIV's days for decades. "Sire, it is time." The king wakes. There follows the first entry. The physicians who examine the king for signs of illness before anything else happens. They check his pulse. They observe his colour. They inquire about his sleep, his digestion, his general condition. This is not ceremonial. Well, it is ceremonial because everything at Versailles is ceremonial, but it's also real medical practice. The health of the king is the health of France. They take it seriously. Then the official entry, the senior nobles, the ones with hereditary rights to attend this moment. They file in. The Duc d'Aumont, whose yellow coat you can no longer see but whose position you can track by the movement of bodies. Others. Men whose families have attended this ceremony for generations. The king's shirt is warmed before it's given to him. There is a person whose job this morning is to stand next to the fire holding the king's shirt so that the linen is at exactly the right temperature when it touches the royal skin. Too cold, and it would be unpleasant. Too hot, and it would be uncomfortable. The right temperature is a professional judgment, acquired through long practice. When the shirt is warm, it is passed, and this passing is itself a ceremony within the ceremony, a careful ritual of precedence and honour, to the person with the highest rank present. That person presents it to the king. This person today is a prince of the blood. This is what they compete for. This gesture, this moment of handing a shirt to a man getting out of bed. And here's the thing that sounds absurd from the outside and makes complete sense once you've been here long enough to understand the logic. It's not absurd at all. Because the man getting out of bed is Louis XIV, who has ruled France for 42 years, who has fought wars and won most of them, built Versailles from a hunting lodge into the greatest palace in Europe, restructured the entire French nobility in a way that made them dependent on his favour, made himself the centre of gravity around which an entire civilization orbits, the Sun King. And if handing his shirt is what proximity to that power costs, then there is a queue 40 people deep of men who would rather die than give up their place in it. The lever takes approximately 90 minutes. In those 90 minutes, Louis XIV wakes up, is examined by his physicians, has his face wiped with a damp cloth. This is, you understand, washing. Changes his shirt for the first time today, is shaved. The shaving is its own ceremony, the razor passing over the king's face with the absolute concentration of a man who understands that any mistake will echo through the rest of his career, has his wig adjusted, is dressed in the first of several layers of court clothing, says prayers, receives briefings from his ministers, and finally emerges from the bedchamber into the salon de l'œil de bœuf for the continuation of the morning. During the shaving, the bowl that holds the soapy water is held by the Duc de la Trémoille, who is not a servant and is not performing this task out of any kind of subservience. He's performing it because the honour of proximity to this moment belongs to him, because his family's history and his own accumulated credit with the king has given him the right to stand here, holding this bowl, while a razor crosses the most important face in France. He holds it perfectly still. His expression is composed. There is no indication on his face that holding a bowl of shaving water for a man who might, on another morning, hold his entire family's fate in a single sentence, is anything other than a completely dignified activity. This is the genius of the system. Louis XIV took the French nobility, a group that, for most of French history, had been a genuine military and political threat to the throne, capable of raising armies, fomenting rebellion, challenging royal authority, and transformed them into men who compete for the honour of holding the shaving bowl, who spend their time and energy and wealth on the performance of court, life on the accumulation of ceremonial rights and positions, instead of on the accumulation of real power. He didn't do it by force. He did it by making Versailles so magnetic that staying away was impossible, by creating a world in which absence from court was interpreted as disgrace, as weakness, as loss of royal favour. By making the ceremonies, the lever and the coucher, the king's dinner and his walks in the garden, his masses and his hunts, into the arena in which rank was demonstrated and maintained. If you're not here, you don't exist. If you're not here, someone else is holding the bowl, and so they come. They all come, and they hold the bowl and hand the shirt and stand in the corridor and breathe the air, all the airs, all the layers of air that Versailles produces, because the alternative is to be somewhere else, and somewhere else is nowhere. You watch all of this from your position near the back of the room. You are learning. When the king finally emerges into the salon de l'œil de bœuf, the room rearranges itself around him. This is the only way to describe it. He doesn't enter the room so much as become its centre of gravity, and everything else in the room adjusts its orbit accordingly. Louis XIV in 1685 is 47 years old. He is not tall, perhaps 5 feet, 5 inches, though the heels and the enormous wig add significantly to his apparent stature. His face is what you've seen in the paintings, broad, somewhat heavy, the eyes dark and sharp and evaluating, the expression of a man who's been performing authority for so long that he can no longer tell the performance from the reality. Perhaps there is no difference anymore. He walks through the room with the particular gait of someone who has never in living memory had to hurry. His steps are measured, not slow, deliberate. Each step placed exactly, the weight distributed with the precision of long practice in heeled shoes that he has worn since childhood. He acknowledges people as he passes. A nod here, a brief word there, an eyebrow raised at someone near the window. That raised eyebrow will be analysed for the rest of the day by the person it was directed at and by everyone who witnessed it. Was it approval? Mild interest? Displeasure concealed as inquiry? The court generates an entire language of micro-expression, and fluency in that language is the difference between social survival and catastrophe. You watch him pass. He doesn't look at you. This is not unexpected. You're a minor figure in this room and he is the centre of everything. But there is still something, a small thing, a small sting, in being invisible to the person whose visibility you've rearranged your entire life around. You remind yourself, 4 months. You've been here 4 months. There are men in this room who have been here 30 years and are still occasionally invisible to the king. Patience, presence, persistence. You turn and follow the crowd toward the chapel. The royal chapel is magnificent. Everything at Versailles is magnificent, but the chapel is magnificent in a way that still catches you, still stops your breath a little, even after 4 months of daily exposure to beauty beyond anything available in the provinces. The ceiling vaults above you in a flood of painted sky, white and gold and the pale blue of heaven, figures of saints and angels ascending, the painted dome convincing you momentarily that the sky above it is real, that you're looking upward not at plaster and paint but at actual heaven opening above the mortal world. The organ plays, the sound hits you in the chest. Not metaphorically, physically, the bass notes of a 17th century pipe organ in a stone room vibrating at frequencies below conscious hearing, vibrating the air, vibrating your rib cage, making your lungs feel the music before your ears do. 2,000 people crowd into the chapel for the King's morning mass. 2,000 people who have somehow between 7 and 9 in the morning managed to be dressed and powdered and presentable. 2,000 people generating 2,000 bodies worth of heat in a stone room where the ventilation consists of windows that are kept closed because it is July, and open windows in July admit insects and bad air. The smell in the chapel is extraordinary. Incense helps. The thick clouds of frankincense and myrrh that the priests generate from their censers work hard at replacing the ambient human atmosphere with something more ecclesiastical. They don't entirely succeed. The incense layers itself over the existing smell rather than replacing it, creating something baroque and complex and very specific to this time and place. If you could bottle the smell of the royal chapel at Versailles during the King's morning mass, you would have created a scent that would be immediately and permanently recognizable to anyone who had ever experienced it. It would not be pleasant, but it would be completely, utterly, historically specific. The smell of absolute power, French variety, 1685. You stand in the gallery assigned to your level of the court. The king kneels in his gallery above, facing the altar. He is deeply, genuinely devout. This is not performance. Louis XIV believes in God with the certainty of a man who has been told from birth that he rules by divine right, and for whom the divinity in question is therefore not an abstraction, but a business partner. He prays with his face tilted upward. His eyes are closed. Around you, people pray or don't pray, according to their own relationship with the divine. Many are watching each other. Many are calculating. Many are doing the perpetual arithmetic of court life. Who is standing close to whom? Who has been given which position in which room? What the sequence of favours and disfavours over the past week suggests about the current state of various relationships with the king. The arithmetic never stops, even in church, especially in church, because the church is where you can study people without seeming to study them, because everyone's eyes are theoretically directed upward, toward God, toward the altar, and if some of those eyes slide sideways to observe the political landscape, well, God presumably understands. After Mass the day opens up. Not entirely. The day at Versailles has its own structures, its own required appearances and unavoidable ceremonies. But between the morning Mass and the midday dinner there is a window, a period in which the court disperses into its various social currents, and in which you can do things that are not strictly prescribed. You go to find something to eat. This sounds simple. It is not simple. The king's dinner, the formal midday meal, which Louis XIV eats alone in the Grand Couvert, watched by however many courtiers can fit in the room, is at 1 o'clock. It is a public ceremony like everything else, and attendance is a mark of distinction that you cannot currently claim at the highest level, though you can sometimes find a position in the outer rooms from which to observe. It is not the meal that will feed you this morning. For people of your level, meals are obtained from a complex ecosystem of lesser dining rooms, informal arrangements, purchases from the vendors who set up near the palace gates, and the occasional invitation to share a table with someone of higher status who has more food than guests. The vendors near the palace gates are your current option. You walk through the Cour Royale, the royal court, the open courtyard that forms the entrance to the palace, and immediately two things happen. First, the air changes. Outside. You are outside. The sky above you is blue and enormous, and the air is moving, actually moving, an actual breeze from the northwest carrying the smell of the gardens, and the distant hint of the Grand Canal, and, if you're imaginative, the very faint salt suggestion of the Atlantic, somewhere beyond the horizon. You breathe. This is what you notice. How much better this is. How much easier it is to breathe actual air, even the air of Versailles in July with the fountains running and the marble, radiating heat and 20,000 people's worth of domestic activity sending its various effluences toward the sky. Even this is better than inside. Second, there is a woman standing against the palace wall, not quite in the Cour Royale, not quite outside of it, in the grey zone between inside and outside where the rules about who can be where are less precisely defined. She has a basket. In the basket there is bread, dark bread, the ordinary bread of ordinary people, not the white bread baked for the king's table, and there are some small tarts, and there are 2 cheeses wrapped in cloth. You've bought from her before. Her name is Marie-Claire, and she comes from a village near Versailles that has grown up to supply the palace's appetites, and her cheese is good, and her tarts are not bad, and her bread is what bread is. Monsieur, she nods. You buy a small tart and a slice of bread and eat them standing near the wall, because there is nowhere to sit in the Cour Royale that wouldn't make you look like a man with nowhere to be, which is the court equivalent of wearing a sign that says I am unimportant. The tart is filled with something dark and sweet. Plum, you think, though the sugar is heavy enough to obscure the underlying fruit. The bread is dense and slightly sour and good, in the way that simple food is good when you're hungry, and it's the first thing you've eaten since yesterday evening. You eat quickly. You're always eating quickly these days, standing up, in passing, snatching calories between appointments and appearances, the grand formal meals, the ones served with ceremony, with silver plates and dozens of courses and orchestral accompaniment. Those are for the king and for the very highest nobility. For everyone else, eating is largely improvised. While you eat, you observe the Cour Royale. The courtyard is constantly in motion. Coaches arrive and depart. Servants carry things. Guards stand at their post with the practiced stillness of men who have decided to treat boredom as a professional virtue. Near the entrance, a group of grooms are managing several horses. The horses are spectacular. These are court horses, bred and trained to carry the wealthy through the ceremonial functions of aristocratic life, not the cart horses of the Paris streets. But they are still horses, and horses produce waste on a schedule indifferent to the dignity of their surroundings. A servant appears with a shovel. He cleans it up. He does this with the same practiced efficiency as Gaston tying your cravat, quickly, completely, without any change of expression. The waste goes in a specific cart. The cart will be taken somewhere outside the palace grounds, where it will become fertilizer for someone's kitchen garden. The economy of waste at Versailles is extensive and mostly invisible. There are, you've learned, people whose entire employment is the management of what Versailles produces that isn't glory in architecture. The night soil collectors who work after midnight, when the corridors are relatively empty, with large covered containers and long-handled implements. The laundresses who manage the extraordinary volume of soiled linen, the king's 3 shirts a day, multiplied by the thousands of people in the palace who change their linen regularly, is a staggering quantity of fabric in constant need of washing. The kitchen workers who manage the waste of feeding 20,000 people, the stable crews dealing with the horses, none of them are visible during the formal hours of the court day. They operate in the margins, early mornings, late nights, the back corridors, the service passages, the routes that run behind the grand galleries, and that the architects built specifically so that the machinery of the palace could function without being seen. The king doesn't want to see it. The court doesn't want to see it. So it's made invisible, but it's always there, back inside. The corridor on the way back to your room takes you past the apartment of the Comtesse de Mortemar, whose name appears frequently enough in the conversations you've been accumulating over 4 months to register as important, without your yet understanding exactly why or how important. Her door is open, not fully open, not invitingly open, but open enough that the sound emerges. A woman's voice, then another, then laughter, high and sharp and extremely controlled. The kind of laughter that says, I find this funny, but I am aware that my finding this funny is itself a performance. Through the gap in the door, you can see approximately 1 square metre of someone's apartment. The square metre contains the edge of a chair, the edge of a dressing table, the corner of a mirror in which you can see at an angle a reflection of a woman being dressed. She's in the process of having her hair arranged. Her actual hair is visible, dark, relatively short, matted against her skull, in the way that hair becomes when it's been under a wig for extended periods. The maid beside her is working with considerable concentration, using a small, fine-toothed comb to manage a situation that clearly requires management. You don't stare. You walk past. You hear the comb's careful work, the slight sounds of effort, and you understand what effort is being applied to, and you are grateful for the fact that your wig, being the simpler architectural achievement of a man's wig rather than the extraordinary constructions that women's court hair is becoming, requires less maintenance. The lice are the thing nobody mentions. You don't mention it either. It's understood. In a world where bathing is rare and hair is covered but never properly washed, in a building housing 20,000 people, in close quarters, certain biological realities are simply accepted. The fine-toothed comb is one response. The wig itself is another. Wearing a wig means your own hair can be kept short and clean beneath it, which makes management easier. Some of the grander wigs, the ones belonging to the very highest nobility, are works of art requiring their own specialist craftspeople. They're built on wire armatures, padded with horsehair, covered with human hair, expensive, or animal hair, cheaper, dressed and powdered and sometimes decorated with small ornaments, ribbons, flowers, feathers. They're not removed between formal occasions. They're worn for days at a time. What's underneath is practical, not aesthetic. You don't examine this too closely. The gap between the appearance of the court and its physical reality is the thing that makes court life possible, and examining it too closely undermines the entire enterprise. The Comtesse de Mortemar, having her hair combed in her open doorway, is a court lady of significant standing, and the combing is a private moment visible to you only by accident, and you do not register having seen it. This is a skill. The selective blindness required to function at Versailles. You're getting better at it. At 11 you go outside, really outside, past the Cour de Marbre, through the gate, out onto the terrace above the gardens, and this is the thing that saves you some days. The thing that makes everything else bearable. Le Notre's garden spread below you in a geometry so perfect it seems impossible. Everything measured, everything deliberate, axes and cross-axes and sight lines calculated with the precision of mathematics, the plants shaped into forms that nature would never produce without intervention, the water arranged in basins and canals that reflect the sky. It's not natural. Nothing about it is natural. But from up here, on the stone terrace with the palace behind you and the gardens descending in, terraces before you down to the Grand Canal stretching for 1.5 kilometers in the distance, the fountains, where they're running, the fountains are running this morning, the high arcs of water catching the July light. The scale of it does something to you that you can't quite name. It makes you feel the opposite of how you felt inside. In the palace, the scale makes you feel small. Here, it makes you feel large, not powerful, not important, but large, in the sense of being part of something bigger than yourself, connected to some vast intention that reaches from the canal horizon all the way back through the palace to the king's bedroom at the centre. The smell out here is different. Grass, real grass, cut short, the green smell of it rising in the morning heat. Box hedges, the particular sharp herbal smell of boxwood in sun. The slight mineral sweetness of fountain water moving through the air. Flowers, the parterres near the terrace are planted with flowers in patterns that from above form shapes you can't quite read at ground level. Shapes intended for the view from the terrace windows, designed for observers who can see the whole geometry at once. You stand at the edge of the terrace and breathe. Other courtiers are here, small groups walking the gravel paths. A couple near the Latona fountain, the king's favourite, you've been told, the fountain depicting the myth of Latona and her children Apollo and Diana, the sun and moon, Louis and his sister by mythological extension, the story told in marble and water at the centre of his garden. They're talking, their heads inclined toward each other, the body language of people who are saying things they wouldn't say inside. The garden functions as the pressure valve of Versailles. Inside, you're always being watched, always performing, always calculating. Outside, in the garden, you're still being watched. You're always being watched, but the watching feels less intense. The space dilutes it. You walk down the steps from the terrace onto the main allée. The gravel crunches under your heels. The sound is satisfying, specific. The sound of Versailles outdoors is distinct from the marble echo of Versailles inside. Gravel and bird song and wind in the topiary, and underneath it all the continuous soft sound of water. The fountains, the basins, the small channels that run between the parterres. To your left, the Parterre du Nord, the northern flower garden, its beds arranged in swirling patterns of red and white, and the particular blue of summer flowers whose name you keep forgetting to learn. To your right, the Parterre du Midi, this southern garden, with views over the orangerie where Louis XIV keeps some 3,000 orange trees in enormous wooden boxes that are wheeled in and out of the shelter as the seasons change. 3,000 orange trees. Not because Louis XIV particularly needs oranges, because he can have 3,000 orange trees, and so he does. You walk toward the Fountain of Apollo. This one is at the far end of the central alley, at the head of the Grand Canal. Apollo, the sun god, the king's mythological self, rises from the water in his chariot, horses plunging upward through the surface, sea monsters spraying water from their open mouths. The whole composition frozen at the moment of the sun's daily rising, the god of light emerging into the world. It's spectacular. You stand at the edge of the basin. The water is slightly green from algae near the edges. The fountain waters aren't perfectly clean. They come from the Machine de Marly, a vast hydraulic engine on the Seine that pumps water uphill through a series of pumps and aqueducts to the various basins of Versailles, and the system leaks, and the water quality is not what anyone would call pristine. But in the middle of the basin, where the central jet throws water 20 meters into the air, the water catches the light and becomes something that has no relationship to its actual quality, becomes light, becomes spectacle. This is Versailles' consistent trick, turning the reality into performance. A boy of perhaps 10 appears beside you. He's well dressed, the child of some courtier, too young yet for the full performance of court life but already learning its forms. He has a small boat on a string, a toy, and he wants to put it in the basin. He looks at you. He wants permission or validation or just the attention of an adult before he does the thing he's going to do anyway. Go ahead, you say. He launches the boat. It spins slightly in the light current created by the jets and then finds a kind of stability, floating in the shadow of one of the sea monsters. The child watches it with the intensity of someone for whom this is the most important thing happening in the world. You watch him for a moment. Then you turn back toward the palace. Noon approaches. You've been moving since 7:15. That's nearly 5 hours. Most of it standing, much of it walking, almost all of it in heeled shoes that are sending increasingly specific complaints up through your calves and into your lower back. The ache is constant now. It's been constant for 4 months. Your body has partially adapted. Your calves are stronger than they've ever been, which is an unexpected gift of court life. But the shoe problem doesn't improve, only becomes more familiar. You stop in an alcove off the main gallery, ostensibly to examine a painting. There are paintings everywhere. The walls essentially are paintings. The surfaces of Versailles are covered in allegory and mythology, and portrait and battle scene and hunting scene, a total coverage of subject and pigment that would take years to fully examine. But actually to shift your weight off your heels for a moment, settle it back into your whole foot. Let the arch rest. Nobody walking past can tell you're doing this. You're looking at a painting. You're doing exactly what a cultivated person walking through a gallery does. This is a skill you've developed, the art of apparently doing one thing while actually doing another. The painting is a hunting scene. Men on horses, dogs in full cry, a stag at bay against some woodland undergrowth. The stag's eyes are wild. The dogs are seconds from reaching it. The king hunts, enthusiastically, regularly, as a fundamental activity of the court calendar. 2 or 3 times a week, Louis XIV and whatever portion of the court accompanies him ride out into the forests around Versailles and chase things. Deer, boar, whatever the season provides. It's the one activity you've observed where the king seems genuinely, uncomplicatedly happy. Not the measured, controlled satisfaction of a ruler performing his function correctly, but actual pleasure. The pleasure of physical activity and open air and the pursuit of something that isn't made of human hierarchy. You haven't been invited to hunt yet. That's a different level of proximity. But you've watched them leave, the king in his hunting coat, the horse's breath in the morning air, the sound of the horns already signalling from the forest ahead. You shift your weight back onto your heels and continue walking. In the corridor near the Salon de la Guerre, you encounter Monsieur de Beauvais. He is 35, attached to the household of the Prince de Condé, and has been at Versailles for 9 years. He knows everything. He tells you things in a way that makes you feel you're being given a gift, though you understand that information at Versailles is never given freely, that everything is currency, and that Monsieur de Beauvais is simply making an investment in your future usefulness. "You were at the Lever this morning," he says, not a question. "I was in the Salon de l'Œil de Bœuf." "The back?" "The back." He nods, unsurprised, not unkindly. "You'll get forward eventually. Who's your patron currently?" "I'm trying to establish a connection with the Marquis de Louvois' circle." Beauvais makes a face, subtle, the exact face of someone who knows something that would change your strategy if they told you it, and who is currently deciding whether to tell you. "Louvois is powerful," he says carefully. But Louvois and the king had let's say a terse exchange last week. Nothing definitive, but people are watching. This is the kind of information that could reshape weeks of social strategy. If Louvois is in a period of disfavour, connecting yourself to his circle is exactly the wrong move. "Who's rising?" Beauvais tilts his head. He's done enough for now. "Come walk with me after dinner," he says. "We can discuss the gardens." He moves away. You watch him go. The gardens. He means, come talk where we can't easily be overheard. The gardens are the closest thing Versailles has to a genuinely private space, which is to say they're not private at all, but they're large, and the sounds disperse and the visual distance is enough. You file the invitation. Continue toward the dining rooms. The king's public dinner is at 1 o'clock, and it is a spectacle that you will never fully adjust to. You have found your way to the outer room, which opens into the room where the formal dinner takes place. You're not in the inner room. You don't have that access. But the door is open, as the door must be open, as the ceremony requires that the public nature of the king's eating be maintained. Louis XIV eats alone. This is a statement. It means there only one person at the centre of this court, only one person whose dining requires formal witness, whose nutrition is a matter of state significance. Everyone else in the palace eats wherever and however they manage. The king eats formally, publicly, attended. He eats well. The menu for today is, by the standards of the palace, routine. Routine at Versailles involves multiple soups, multiple entrées, multiple meat dishes, bread of several kinds, vegetables prepared in several ways, wine, and a dessert course that would constitute a full meal in most European kitchens. It is carried from the kitchens, which are a significant distance from the dining room, because placing kitchens near the royal apartments would admit their smells into the royal air, by a procession of servants, the food covered with silver domes that preserve heat, approximately as well as silver domes were ever going to preserve heat, which is to say, imperfectly. The king's food arrives at his table somewhat cooler than it was when it left the kitchen. This is the price of the palace's layout. He doesn't seem to mind, or rather, he eats with the composed pleasure of a man who has been eating well his entire life, and for whom food is one of the reliable satisfactions of existence. He eats quickly, actually. You've been told this, and watching from the outer room it seems true. Louis XIV eats fast and with appetite, not the ceremonious picking over that some of the courtiers perform in the dining rooms. The musicians play. You can hear them from where you're standing. A small ensemble in the corner of the inner room. playing something formal and pleasant that provides an acoustic background for the meal without demanding attention. Music at Versailles is background. Music at Versailles is furniture. You watch for 20 minutes. Then the crowd shifts. You shift with it, and you go find your own lunch. Your lunch is a bowl of soup from one of the lesser dining rooms in the south wing, where servants and minor courtiers eat at long, communal tables with none of the ceremony of the grand apartments. The soup is thin. Something with leeks and a little bread dissolved into it for body, a fragment of some meat that had a previous existence in a better kitchen before finding its current application in yours. It's warm and it fills the hollow that the morning's tart left, and you eat it at the end of a long table between a secretary belonging to someone you don't recognize and a young woman who is also a minor courtier, and who eats with the focused efficiency of someone for whom this soup is not supplementary, but primary. You eat. You do not talk. This is not unusual. The dining room has the low, constant sound of many conversations, but none of them seem to require your participation. When you're done, you wipe your mouth with a cloth that someone has managed to make almost white, and set your bowl at the end of the table where the kitchen servants will collect it, and you stand up and go back into the world of the palace. There is an afternoon appointment you've been looking forward to. The perfumer. His name is Simon Barbe, and he works out of a small shop near the Orangerie, one of dozens of suppliers who orbit the palace the way smaller bodies orbit a planet. He provides scent to perhaps a quarter of the court, which means he knows things, not state secrets, not the kind of thing that Beauvais trades in, but something almost as useful. He knows how everyone smells. Literally. He knows whose perfume is starting to go off because they've worn it too long and the bass notes are turning. He knows who can afford his best civet and who is mixing in cheaper alternatives. He knows who is wearing last season's scent because they can't afford this season's. He knows the difference between the smell of someone who changes their linen daily and someone who changes it weekly. And he knows how to mask the latter sufficiently that the former isn't obvious. He's one of the most useful people you know. You find his workroom in the afternoon light. It's warm. The south-facing window has been collecting July sun all day, and the smell inside is overwhelming in a completely different way from the corridor smell. It's overwhelming in the way that a flower market is overwhelming. Too much of a good thing. A density of pleasant smells that reaches a threshold and crosses over into something complex and slightly nauseating. Every flat surface is covered. Glass vials, carefully labelled in a hand so small you can barely read it. Stone mortars still holding the residue of that morning's work. Copper alembics, the equipment of distillation, their tubes still slightly warm to the touch. Dried flowers in bunches from the ceiling, lavender, rose, jasmine, orange blossom, wax tablets with notes, a small notebook, the pages swollen with the oils that permeate everything in this room. Barber himself is a small man of perhaps 50. He has the particular quality of someone who has spent his entire professional life surrounded by strong smells. A kind of nose deafness, an inability to smell what he's smelling anymore, which paradoxically makes him better at his work because he can detect the components of a scent without being overwhelmed by the whole. Monsieur de Montclair, he looks at you with professional assessment. Your vetiver is holding, but you'll want something lighter for July. That's why I'm here. He crosses the room, is a small room, 2 strides, and begins moving among his vials. For the morning function, something with more orange, less weight, here. He holds a small vial under your nose. You inhale, orange blossom, something deeper underneath it. Sandalwood, you think, or maybe cedar. A very faint sweetness that's almost floral but not quite. What is that underneath? Benzoin, resin. It fixes the top notes, makes the orange last longer. He watches your expression. You like it. It's good. It will help with the morning air in the salon de l'œil de bœuf, he says. Not delicately, just matter-of-factly. He has been making and selling scent in this palace for 20 years. He is beyond delicacy on the subject of what the salon de l'œil de bœuf smells like on a warm morning with 80 people in it. You buy the vial. It's expensive. Everything good at Versailles is expensive, and scent is one of the necessities you can't compromise on. You pay him in coin, which he counts carefully and puts in a drawer without looking at it. There's a new preparation I'm working on, he says, turning back to his vials. Something for the king. He's asked for something cooler for summer, aquatic notes, something that suggests the canal without actually smelling like the canal. This is an enormous commission. The king's personal perfume is not just commerce, it's history, it's culture. The smell of Louis XIV will become the smell of the age, because what he wears, the court wears, because what the court wears, Europe wears, because France sets the standard for everything. Can you manage it? Barb smiles. Just slightly. I always manage it. You believe him. On the way back through the palace, you pass one of the hidden stairwells. Not hidden deliberately, not in the dramatic sense of secret passages and concealed doors, but hidden in the sense of unimportant, of existing for functional rather than aesthetic purposes, of being the back-of-house route that the servants use to move through the building without interrupting the performances happening in the formal spaces. The door is slightly open. It admits sound, footsteps, quick and purposeful, going down. The clatter of something metal, a chamber pot lid, you think, and then you don't think about it further. The night soil collectors work at night, but chamber pots require management throughout the day. Gaston manages yours, which means you don't see the process, which means you don't have to think about the process. But the process happens dozens of times per hour throughout the palace as the servants of the court manage the biological realities of 20,000 people in a way that keeps those realities invisible to everyone important. There are courtiers at Versailles who've been here 20 years and have never once thought about where their chamber pot goes. This is also a gift of the system. You continue down the corridor. Your understanding of how hygiene works at Versailles crystallized one afternoon about 6 weeks after you arrived, when you were in the wrong corridor at the wrong time and witnessed something that wasn't intended for you to witness. The laundry. Not the laundry itself. The laundry is in the outbuildings, well away from the main palace, in a complex of low buildings where the washing happens in large basins with hot water and lye, and the physical labour of women whose arms and hands are perpetually raw from the combination of chemicals and effort. That you'd never seen and had no access to. What you witnessed was the delivery. The linen delivery. A cart covered with white cloth being brought through a service gate in the afternoon. 2 footmen carrying baskets of folded linen up a back staircase. The linen itself still slightly warm from the drying racks, folded with a precision that suggested measurement rather than casual folding. The king's shirts, dozens of them, freshly laundered, pressed, folded into exact dimensions, ready to be received by the valets who would distribute them into the appropriate wardrobe. The quantity was astonishing. Not just the shirts, though the 3 shirts a day requirement multiplied across the year, produces over 1,000 shirts, but everything else, the chemises of the noblewomen, the stockings, the cravats and neckcloths, the handkerchiefs, used for everything from face wiping to nose blowing to the polite management of various unpleasant substances. The handkerchief is the Swiss Army knife of 17th century personal hygiene. You use yours constantly, against the nose obviously when the smell requires it, against the face to manage the inevitable perspiration of a hot day in heavy clothing, against the hands to address the grime that accumulates on any surface you touch, the walls, the balustrades, the backs of chairs. You carry too. On formal occasions, 3. The whiteness of a handkerchief is a status marker almost as clear as a coat. Clean white linen, fresh, unsmudged. This is a daily accomplishment that requires daily attention and daily expenditure. Gaston, make sure yours are clean. This is not a minor part of his job. What you never think about now is the amount of physical labour that keeps the whiteness white. The women at the washing basins, the heat and the lye, the aching hands and the waterlogged skin and the endless repetition, the drying racks and the pressing and the folding. All of that is invisible. The white handkerchief appears in your pocket every morning, and that's all you need to know. You have developed over 4 months a mental map of Versailles organised not by the official guide, the room names, the historical significance, the artistic content, but by smell. Every area of the palace has a smell profile, and knowing the smell profile tells you things that the official guide doesn't. The hall of mirrors smells on a morning after a court evening, like candle smoke and spilled wine, and the complex overlay of 2,000 people's perfume slowly decaying in the absence of ventilation. It smells, on a morning after it's been cleaned, like beeswax and lemon oil and the slightly mineral quality of glass, and in that state it's nearly pleasant. The king's antechambers smell like the salon de l'œil de bœuf, human and perfumed and warm. But they have an additional note that you've come to identify specifically with proximity to power, something slightly sweeter, something that might be the particular perfume mixture the king uses, something that might be the smell of authority itself, which you understand is not a real smell, but which you have come to associate with specific rooms regardless. The chapel smells like incense and cold stone, and underneath that the warm human smell of congregation. The south wing corridors late in the afternoon smell like the kitchen, because the kitchens are below and to the south, and the ventilation in this wing is inadequate. The smells of cooking, meat, bread, sauces reducing, fat rendering, find their way upward through the building and inhabit the corridors by late afternoon, which is actually not unpleasant, which is a reminder that one of the things Versailles does very well is feed its residents. The north wing corridor, outside your room, smells, particularly near the third stairwell, like the thing you don't examine too closely. This is a consistent feature, not an emergency, not something that anyone treats as requiring urgent attention. It's the smell of the palace's plumbing limitations made manifest, and it's managed partly by the fact that everyone in the North Corridor also wears perfume and doesn't comment on it. The gardens smell like life, like growth, like soil and water, and the productive biological processes that underlie the geometric beauty. The grass, after it's been cut, they cut it, the army of gardeners, on a rotating schedule, maintaining the perfect flatness, has a smell so clean and green and fundamentally good that you sometimes detour through the parterres just to breathe it. The Grand Canal close up smells like a river, algae and silt and the organic richness of water that has had time to develop a microbiome. Not unpleasant. Actually vaguely pleasant in the specific way of natural water, which is to say, not like anything human-made. The orangery smells, in summer, like orange trees, like the oil in the leaves and the flowers, and underneath it the clean, sharp sweetness of citrus. This is one of the best smells at Versailles. You sometimes walk through the orangerie when you don't need to, just for the smell. July is the worst month. You understand this now in a way that theory couldn't have prepared you for. In the winter, the palace has problems. It's cold. The fireplaces smoke. The corridors are drafty in ways that somehow still manage to be smoky. The chamber pot problem is mitigated slightly by the fact that cold air is simply less expressive than warm air of its qualities. But in July, the palace's physical limitations become unignorable. The stone, which has been absorbing heat since May, gives it back slowly and continuously. The rooms that face south are warm from dawn. By midday, the south-facing apartments are genuinely hot. Not uncomfortable warm, but hot in a way that raises questions about the advisability of wearing a wool coat with a silk lining. But you wear the coat, because you always wear the coat, because the coat is part of the performance, and stopping the performance because it's warm is not an available option. The perfume arms race reaches its peak in summer. What works in March, a relatively subtle application of your usual vetiver, is insufficient in July. The vetiver disappears into the ambient heat. The layers of everyone else's summer perfume, the more assertive output of bodies, working harder to maintain temperature in an environment not designed for comfort. You apply the new orange benzoin preparation that Simon Barb mixed for you. You apply it more generously than you'd normally use perfume. A drop on the wrists, a drop behind the ears, a careful application to the inside of the collar, where warmth will release it slowly through the day. Then you go out into the July palace, and within an hour you've contributed your own layer to the atmosphere. This is the Versailles experience. You understand now why the king's physicians are concerned about summer. Not just for him, for everyone. The combination of heat and crowding and the hygiene practices of the period create conditions that are not, from a purely epidemiological standpoint, safe. Malaria is a genuine risk. The swampy ground on which Versailles was built produces mosquitoes in summer, and the builders of the palace chose aesthetics over drainage, which means the area around the palace is, in certain months, genuinely malarial. Several courtiers have had episodes of the recurring fever that the physicians call marsh fever, and which you recognise as something worse than an inconvenience. The king himself has had it, multiple times. The physicians manage it with quinine, Peruvian bark they call it, which is available at enormous expense from apothecaries who obtain it from the New World, and with rest and their other treatments, some of which work and some of which are based on theories that future centuries will find interesting. You keep yourself away from the west end of the gardens in the evenings, where the marsh ground is closest to the palace, not because you've been told to. Nobody has told you anything useful about malaria prevention, because nobody in 1685 knows what malaria is or how it's transmitted, but because you've noticed that the people who get the fever tend to be the ones who walk in the lower gardens at dusk, and you have decided, empirically, that this is not a coincidence, even if you can't explain why. Empirical reasoning as preventive medicine, you'll take it. The fountains are not always running. This surprises visitors who expect the permanent spectacle of Versailles to include the permanently spectacular fountains. The reality is more conditional. The machine de Marly, the hydraulic system that pumps water from the Seine up to the palace, can supply enough water to run all the fountains simultaneously for approximately 4 hours, 4 hours out of 24. What this means in practice: the fountains run when the king is walking in the gardens. The king announces his garden walks, or rather, the announcement passes through the appropriate channels to the fountain managers, and the system is activated in the areas where the king will be. He walks through a landscape of running water and flowing jets. The moment he turns back toward the palace, messengers run ahead of his route and signals are given, and the fountains behind him are shut off. The king always walks through a landscape of full fountains. Anyone who doesn't carefully track the king's planned route walks through whatever the fountain managers have gotten around to starting. You've learned the king's usual routes. You walk them about 20 minutes ahead of him on his garden days, which means you get the fountains going and also means you're not in the way when the actual royal party passes through. This is not dishonest. It's efficient. The Grand Canal, which is too large to be affected by the machine de Marly's limitations, always has water. The small boats that traverse it, gondolas, gifts from the Doge of Venice to Louis XIV, manned by Venetian gondoliers who've been imported along with their boats, are available to carry courtiers who want to spend an afternoon on the water. The water of the Grand Canal is not clean. You would not want to fall in. But the surface, in sunlight, is a mirror reflecting the sky, and the experience of sitting in a gondola moving slowly down the canal with the palace visible at the far end, and the gardens on either side and the fountains, where running, arching against the blue sky, is one that produces something that might be happiness if happiness were allowed at Versailles. Something lighter than happiness. Something approximating contentment. You've been on the canal twice. You're planning a third trip for the upcoming Sunday. Here is something that will become clear if you pay attention, and you pay attention. Cleanliness at Versailles is not a practical standard. It's a social one. The king is clean. The king is always clean. He changes his shirt 3 times a day, and his linen is the finest available, and his personal perfumers ensure that at any moment he is surrounded by an aura of controlled scent. The king is clean because he is the king, because his cleanliness is a statement about his dignity and his divine right and his absolute centrality to everything happening around him. The king is also, by any objective measure you might apply from the outside, not particularly clean. He doesn't bathe regularly. His medical care involves treatments that would make a modern observer flinch. He lives in a palace that smells, by any honest assessment, terrible in places. But the king is clean because everyone agrees he is clean, because the performance of cleanliness that he enacts, the fresh linen, the morning ritual, the perfume, the precision, is so thorough and so absolute that it creates its own reality. Cleanliness is not a fact here. It is a consensus. The nobility are clean in proportion to their rank. The highest-ranking duke changes his shirt twice a day and has 3 valets and spends more on perfume than most people earn in a year. The minor courtier, you, changes once a day if the laundry cooperates, has 1 valet and spends carefully on a single good perfume and makes it last. Below you, the servants. The servants at Versailles range from the senior household officials, men of genuine social standing whose positions carry prestige and income, down to the actual physical labour force, the workers who carry and clean and wash and maintain. The senior servants dress well and smell appropriate. The lower servants wear livery and smell like work. and below the servants the invisible ones, the night soil collectors, the laundresses, the workers in the kitchen's deepest level. These people are not cleaning themselves by the standards of anyone above them and are not expected to. They are the metabolic reality of the palace, processing its waste and maintaining its function, and their own cleanliness is not a concern of anyone important enough to have opinions about it. This hierarchy is so consistent, so deeply embedded in the logic of Versailles, that it's nearly invisible. It requires the specific kind of attention you've been developing over 4 months to see it as a system rather than simply as the natural order of things. The natural order of things. That's the phrase they'd use. God ordained the hierarchy. The king at the top, then the princes of the blood, then the dukes, descending through the levels to the servants, to the peasants, to the servants of the servants. God ordained the hierarchy. The hierarchy expresses itself, among other ways, in who gets clean water and who doesn't. 3 o'clock. You are in the salon d'Apollon, not for any particularly good reason, but because you've been in motion all day and this is where motion has brought you. And the salon d'Apollon is where the court congregates in the afternoon before the evening begins. The room smells like summer. Summer here means the particular combination of July heat absorbed by stone walls over the past 3 months and now radiating outward, plus the candles burning in the sconces even in the afternoon, because the light through the windows, magnificent as it is, doesn't fully penetrate every corner, plus the 80 or so people currently in the room and their combined olfactory contribution. You've stopped noticing the smell mostly. You know you haven't stopped noticing it in any physiological sense. Your nose is still receiving information. Your brain is still processing it. But the information has been reclassified, filed under environment rather than event. The smell of the palace is the smell of the palace, the way the sound of traffic is the sound of cities. Background, present but not foreground. This is what everyone means when they say, it takes time. You're talking to the Baron de Richaud, who is 42 and has been at court for 15 years, and is, in the specific sense that matters here, powerful. Not powerful because of any formal position. The positions that matter are the ones attached to the king's household, which women cannot hold in the same way. But powerful because she has 15 years of relationships, obligations, secrets and social credit, and she deploys them with the precision of someone who has had a long time to learn how. She is telling you in a way that doesn't sound like telling you anything important. Something important about the upcoming appointment cycle. The king reviews positions every autumn. Certain household functions are reassigned. The rotation is not entirely predictable, but there are patterns, and the Baron knows the patterns. Monsieur de Sévigné will likely be moved, she says, examining the painting near the door with the expression of someone who is not thinking about the painting, which creates a vacancy in the third antechamber rotation. The third antechamber rotation, the right to stand at specific prescribed moments in the morning ceremony, in the third antechamber. The room one step closer to the king's bedroom than where you currently stand. This is the opportunity she's describing. In the social vocabulary of Versailles, the distance between the third antechamber and the second is the distance between obscurity and visibility. What would it require, you ask? She smiles, a small smile, the smile of someone who's been asked this question before. The appropriate expressions of gratitude in the appropriate directions, a demonstration that you understand the responsibilities of the position. This means she can facilitate it. Her relationships, her credit, her carefully accumulated power in the social machinery. She can make this happen. She will make this happen because you will owe her something, and because a small debt incurred now will be repaid at a moment of her choosing with something of greater value than the debt itself. This is how everything works here. I would be very grateful, you say. I know, she says, and turns to talk to someone else. By 5 o'clock your body has opinions, specific opinions. Your heels, which have been elevated for 9 hours now, have entered a new phase of complaint that has moved past, aching into something more like burning. The balls of your feet, which take the load when the heel is raised, are suggesting that a sit-down would be appreciated. Your lower back, which has been maintaining posture through the combination of corset-free discipline and years of practice with the specific posture required for court presentation, is tight across the lumbar. Your shoulders are tight. The wig, which weighs more than nothing and sits on your head at an angle that isn't quite the angle your spine prefers, has been applying its weight in a slightly off-centre way all day, and your neck is registering its displeasure. You are hungry. The midday soup was sufficient but not generous, and the body, which has been walking and standing and maintaining performance for 8 hours, would like more fuel. You're also, and this is the one you notice least, which is perhaps most telling, tired in a way that has nothing to do with physical exertion, socially tired from the constant calculation, the permanent awareness of being observed, the sustained effort of performing yourself correctly in a context where an incorrect performance has real consequences. It's cognitively exhausting performing yourself all day, every moment, and yet everyone does it. All day, every moment, because the alternative is absence, and absence is death of a social kind, and at Versailles social death is the only death that matters. You find a seat in an antechamber where the level of performance required is slightly lower than in the main galleries. Not absent. You're never absent, but lower. A chair near the wall, back straight. The appearance of rest that isn't actually rest. A footman passes with the tray. On the tray are small glasses of wine and small pieces of something that might be a sweet biscuit. You take one of each. The wine is cooler than you expected. Someone has done the work of cooling it. And better than what you usually encounter at this level of the afternoon distribution. The biscuit is sweet and slightly almond-flavoured. You eat it in 3 bites. This is Versailles' consistent paradox. Moments of extraordinary pleasure embedded in a context of extraordinary discomfort. The wine is very good. The biscuit is very good. Your feet feel like small personal disasters. Both of these things are true simultaneously. At 6 the evening begins. The evening at Versailles is, in its way, more demanding than the day. The day has its mandatory ceremonies, the lever, the mass, the king's dinner, but between them there are hours when the court disperses and the performance intensity drops slightly. In the evening, the intensity comes back and stays up. Evenings at Versailles are structured around the king's entertainment. Several nights a week, the Grand's apartments, the state apartments, are opened for what is called the apartment, a social gathering that moves through a series of interconnected rooms, each with its designated activity: gambling, billiards, music, dancing sometimes, conversation always. The king moves through these rooms on a schedule that is known but not precisely announced, so that everyone is in a state of prepared readiness, always potentially in the presence of the king, always potentially about to be seen. Tonight is an apartment night. You have time to return to your room first, Gaston is there, waiting, which he always is, which you've stopped finding strange. He has already prepared the evening clothes, a different coat, the formal one, the one that cost 4 months of income and that you wear with the care you'd give a weapon. He has pressed the cravat with a heated iron. He has repowdered the wig where the afternoon's activities have disturbed it. He helps you undress, not quickly because nothing at Versailles is quick, and you stand for a moment in just your linen shirt in the cooling air of the room, and your body makes various sounds of relief that you choose not to acknowledge, but that Gaston almost certainly hears. The linen shirt, the clean one that you've been wearing all day, is warm now. Warm and slightly damp from the body's labour, and slightly marked from the day's activities, in ways too subtle to see but present in the way old fabric holds information. Gaston removes it, brings the fresh one, cool linen, the coolness of clean fabric not yet touched by body heat, spreading across your shoulders and down your arms. This is the moment. This is what the linen theory is actually describing, you think. Not just hygiene as a theory, hygiene as a sensation, the actual physical experience of clean linen against skin that had been working all day. The coolness, the freshness, the way the fabric doesn't cling the way the warm, wet shirt clings. It feels extraordinary. For approximately 30 seconds in the privacy of your room, getting dressed for the evening, you understand completely why the theory of linen is the theory of cleanliness. Not because the theory is scientifically correct. Something in you suspects it's not, though you can't say exactly why or what the alternative might be. But because the experience of fresh linen is the experience of renewal, and renewal is what cleanliness means at any level below the abstract. Ready, monsieur, Gaston says. You check the mirror. The evening version of yourself looks back, slightly more elaborate than the morning version. The formal coat has more embroidery, the cravat is more carefully arranged, the wig has been freshly settled on your head with Gaston's practiced accuracy. You smell of the orange benzoin preparation. You look like you belong at a formal court function. You go. The apartment begins in the Salon de Diane. Billiards. Louis XIV plays billiards well, and the billiard table in the Salon de Diane is a professional-grade instrument that he treats with the seriousness he brings to anything he does well. He plays with composed intensity, each shot measured, the cue handled with the ease of long practice. Around the table, courtiers watch with expressions ranging from genuine interest to performed enthusiasm, depending on their relationship with the truth about billiards. You don't play billiards. You stand near the edge of the room and observe. The candles are lit. In the evening, the state apartments transform. During the day, they run on natural light. The enormous windows, the carefully placed mirrors that distribute sunlight through the rooms. At night, the candles take over, and candles do something that sunlight doesn't, which is to add warmth and softness and a quality of flickering unreality to everything they illuminate. The Hall of Mirrors by candlelight is something that paintings have tried to capture and cannot fully manage. 20,000 candles. The exact number was calculated by Lebrun with mathematical precision, reflecting in 357 mirrors, creating an infinite regress of flame and reflection that doesn't just illuminate the room, but transforms it into something that isn't quite a room anymore, something that occupies the borderline between architecture and theatre, between space and spectacle. You walk through it en route to the gambling salon and you slow down, as you always slow down here, and you look, as you always look, and it is still extraordinary, as it is always extraordinary. The smell in the Hall of Mirrors in the evening is, hot wax, which has a sweetness to it, and the accumulated warmth of those thousands of flames slightly heating the air, and perfume from the courtiers passing through, and underneath all of it the persistent presence of the palace. You move through it and into the gambling salon. The gambling salon is the salon de Mars, card tables. Many card tables covered in green cloth, lit from above with branches of candles. The sound is specific. The soft shuffling of cards, the click of coins or tokens on the table, the low murmur of players, occasionally a louder exclamation, never too loud, this is not a tavern, when fortune goes particularly for or against. The stakes are significant. The gambling at Versailles apartments is not the token play you might find at a lesser gathering. These are wealthy people, bored wealthy people, people for whom money is the one form of risk available in an environment that has eliminated most other forms. The sums that change hands at these tables in a single evening would make your yearly income look like pocket change. You don't gamble. You can't afford to gamble. You circulate through the room with the appearance of someone who might gamble later, who is simply not quite ready yet, who has business elsewhere in the evening's rooms but will certainly be back. This is a performed reluctance, and it's necessary. A man who can't afford to gamble at the apartment gambling tables has no business being at the apartment gambling tables. You need to be here, in this room, visible, but you can't play, so you perform a very sophisticated relationship with the question of playing. Near the largest table, a game is in progress that involves several senior nobles and an enormous pile of gold coins that you try not to count. The man on the winning side of the table, you can tell by the body language of everyone around the table, the slight lean in his direction, the attention directed his way, is the Marquis de Dangeau. You know Dangeau slightly. He's in his mid-40s, a genuinely skilled card player in an environment where card playing is a primary form of social display, and he has the particular quality of someone who manages to win consistently without making his losing opponents feel humiliated, which is a form of social intelligence as sophisticated as anything in the palace. He's also known for keeping a detailed journal of everything he witnesses at Versailles, a daily record of who said what to whom, who attended which ceremony, what the king wore and what he ate and what he expressed interest in and what he seemed indifferent to. This journal will become one of the primary sources historians use to understand what Versailles was actually like. You don't know this. You just know Dangeau as a good card player who is currently winning several hundred livres. He catches your eye across the table and nods, just barely, an acknowledgement of your presence. You nod back. This is progress. 3 months ago, he didn't know you existed. The king arrives. The room doesn't exactly go quiet, the gambling doesn't stop, the games continue. But there's a shift, a reorientation. The room, which has been roughly circular in its social dynamics, with no clear centre, suddenly has a centre. Louis XIV walks through the Salon de Mars with the pace he always uses, measured, present. The expression he always wears, a composed attention to everything, a slight alertness that never quite becomes surprise, a warmth that is real but controlled and rationed carefully. He stops at a table, watches a hand of play, makes brief observation, you're too far away to hear it, that produces approving laughter from the players. He moves on. The room breathes out slightly. The king's passage through any space is a kind of weather event, a brief intensification of everything, and when he moves through and away, there's a slight release of pressure. You've been watching where he moves. The pattern of his movement through the apartment rooms tells you things about his current concerns, his current interests, which relationships he's choosing to make visible. Tonight he stopped twice in the gambling salon and once at the billiards table. He spoke for perhaps 4 minutes total to identifiable individuals. You've logged the individuals. Tomorrow you'll see what the social landscape has shifted to reflect tonight's conversation. There's a woman near the window. You've been noticing her for 20 minutes. Not because she's particularly striking, though she is, in the particular way that court beauty works, a combination of careful construction and something underneath it, but because of where she's standing. She's standing in one of the window embrasures slightly back from the main flow of the room, and the people moving through the room are navigating slightly around her in a way that is very subtle and very specific and means something. Exclusion. Practiced so smoothly it looks like geography. She's not being shunned. Too obvious. Too crude. She's just being slightly not included. In the conversations that form and disperse and reform around the room, her area of the room has a lower gravity. People gravitate slightly away from her window. She's watching this happen. You can tell she's watching it from the exact quality of her stillness. The stillness of someone who is maintaining composure in the face of something uncomfortable rather than the stillness of someone at ease. You don't know her name yet. You file her face in your inventory of observations. Everything is information here. Everything is a data point in the ongoing calculation of who stands where. By 9 o'clock, you're deeply tired in a way that has layers. The physical layer. Your feet, your back, the accumulated fatigue of a body that has been performing all day. The social layer, the continuous computation of position and relationship and implication. The cognitive layer, the effort of attention, of tracking everything, of being present in a context that rewards presence. You're also slightly flushed from the warmth of the rooms. The candles generate significant heat, and a gathering of 300 people in formal dress in rooms lit by 20,000 candles is, thermally speaking, a challenge. And the flush has done something to your perfume, activating the middle notes of the orange benzoin in a way that is probably making you smell more intensely than you'd planned. You're aware of this. You're aware that you're warmer and more olfactorily present than is ideal. You're aware that the cravat is slightly less crisp than it was 3 hours ago, and that the powder in the wig has been partially redistributed by the warmth of the evening. You're still performing. You're performing a version of yourself that has been slightly modified by the evening's wear, but you're still performing. This is what it means to live at Versailles. The performance doesn't stop. Not until you close your door and Gaston helps you out the coat, and you sit on the edge of your bed in your shirt with your wig off, sitting on the table beside you, and the room is quiet enough to hear the faint sound of the fountains that the groundskeepers run briefly in the late evening for reasons you've never been able to determine. Only then, and only until morning, your room at night is the only space in Versailles that is genuinely yours, not because the room is private. The servants have access. Gaston moves through it freely on his various errands. The chambermaid comes in the early morning to manage the brazier and the chamber pot. The room is not technically private, but it has a quality of yourness that nowhere else in the palace has. The particular arrangement of objects on the table, the books, the writing materials, a small portrait of your mother done by a provincial painter that is not good art, but that you look at most evenings. The way the candlelight falls at this angle from this candle in this sconce, creating shadows in these specific places, the sound of the window frame in the wind when the wind is from the north, These things are yours in the sense that no one else knows them or values them. They exist entirely for you. You sit at the table. You have a habit developed over the past 2 months of writing notes in the evening. Not a proper journal. Dongzhou's journal is a proper journal, daily, detailed. The work of someone who has decided to document a historical moment, but notes, impressions. The things you notice today that might mean something and that you don't want to lose before morning. The Baron de Richaud, the third antechamber rotation, Beauvai's warning about Louvois, the woman in the window embrasure who was being not quite excluded, the Marquis de Dongzhou's nod across the gambling table. These are the things that happen today, not the ceremonies, not the formal events. Those are public and recorded and will be in any history of Versailles. The things you wrote down are the texture, the grain, the specific quality of this day in this place. The things that don't make it into history because they're too small and too local and too dependent on knowing the context. You write for perhaps 20 minutes. Then you put down the pen. Gaston comes in to prepare the room for night. He banks the brazier. In July, this is minimal work, just making sure it won't flare, up unattended rather than making sure it stays warm. He brings water for your evening wash. He takes the evening coat and prepares it for tomorrow's examination by the light of morning. He's been doing this for 15 years. He'll do it for 15 more. He's better at this job than anyone has any right to be, and he does it with a quality of attention that is the professional equivalent of art, and you've never asked him if he likes it or if he wanted something different from his life. You should. Probably. You won't. Probably. This is also part of Versailles. The ability to not ask certain questions, to not examine certain realities, to allow the machinery to run invisibly by choosing not to look at it too closely. You're learning it. You're getting better at it. It doesn't feel like virtue. 3 weeks after you arrived at Versailles, in your first autumn there, you had an experience that you've been trying to articulate ever since. You were walking alone in the gardens, not the formal gardens, the wilder section to the north where the maintenance is less strict and the plantings less geometric, and the illusion of control that the rest of the gardens maintain is slightly looser. And you stopped walking because something about the light required you to stop. The afternoon light, specific to that day, specific to that angle, was doing something to the trees, chestnut mostly, their autumn leaves still holding green with the occasional gold beginning, that made them look as though they were lit from inside, as though whatever light was in the world was being generated by the leaves rather than received by them. It lasted perhaps 30 seconds. The cloud moved, or the sun shifted, or your angle to both changed, and it was over. You stood there for a moment after it ended, and what you thought was, this is why they build things, not the specific this of that light, but the broader this of the attempt to create a place where that light was possible, where the trees were positioned correctly and maintained correctly, and where the space was shaped correctly for that specific quality of afternoon light to find its right angle and its right moment, and to produce something, a sight, an experience, a second of existence that couldn't have happened any other way. Versailles is a flawed attempt, an expensive, grandiose, unequal, sometimes deeply unpleasant attempt. But it is an attempt to shape the world into something that produces beauty at any cost, at any scale, with any number of people deployed to maintain the attempt, and any number of people required to simply live within it, rather than benefit from it. You've been thinking about that light all autumn and winter and into this summer. You still don't know what to do with the thought. Lying in bed, the sounds of the July night at Versailles, distant, muffled, layered. The night soil collectors working the corridors below. You can't hear them, specifically they've learned to work quietly, but you know they're there. The machinery of the palace in its night mode. Somewhere, a door. Somewhere, a brief burst of conversation. Voices too far away to make out words. Someone returning late from whatever the evening became for them, finding their way through the dark palace. The fountains briefly, then silence. Your feet have been on the floor for most of the evening. You put them up only when lying down, and now they are up, and the relief is the physical relief of a body finally allowed to do what it's been requesting for hours. Your back is similarly expressing appreciation for the horizontal. You think about the third antechamber, and the Baron de Richeau, and the social machinery that might move you one step closer to the centre of things. You think about Simon Barbe in his workroom, working on a perfume for the king. The ambition of that. Making something that will touch the king's skin, that will be the smell of Louis XIV for a season, that will be sniffed and appreciated and imitated and perhaps even remembered. The ambition of perfumers, trying to put something beautiful into the air, trying to make it last. Not so different in the end from architects. Not so different from anyone here. The particular quality of July light through the north wing window. The smell of the gardens in the early morning, before the heat brings out the human layers. Simon Barbe's orange benzoin preparation, cooling on your wrists in the morning air. Gaston's hands, warm and dry, adjusting your cravat for what might be the 200th time. The Baron de Richeau's small smile and what it means and what it will cost. The king's profile seen through the door of the bedchamber in the moment after the shirt is presented and the ceremony of waking is nearly complete. These are the things that stay, not the grand events, not the formal ceremonies. Those are recorded, they're in the history books, they're documented by Dangeau's journal, and the official court records and the paintings that Lebrun is producing with his team in the great rooms of the palace. Those are the public Versailles. What stays for you is the private version, the smell version, the version that has no record except the memory of a 23-year-old man from the provinces who came here with the letter of introduction and 4 months of accumulated observation, who is learning to perform himself well enough to survive in a context designed to reward performance and punish authenticity. The gap between the two, performance and authenticity, is the most interesting space at Versailles, where the real people live in the gap between what they show and what they are. Louis XIV in his bedchamber, in those seconds after the valet says, "Sire, it is time," and before the ceremony begins, must be just a man, briefly. A man in his own bed, in his own body in the particular, private awareness of morning before the day's performance begins. That moment, if it exists, is invisible to everyone. Even Dangeau, who records everything, can't record that. The private self behind the ceremony. Maybe it's there. Maybe the ceremony has been running so long it's all the way down now, all the way through, the performance indistinguishable from the reality. Maybe everyone here is the same. Maybe that's the real secret of Versailles, that it works because it eliminates the private, because it makes the performance so total and so sustained and so comprehensive that eventually there's nothing else left. Everyone becomes exactly what they perform, and the palace functions as a machine for producing people who are exactly what they appear to be, which sounds like inauthenticity, but might be a kind of radical honesty. You perform, therefore you are. In the morning you will go back. The routine will reassert itself. The cold cloth, the fresh linen, the careful dressing, the walk through corridors you know now by their smell as much as their appearance. The salon de l'œil de bœuf will be full. The ceremony will begin. The king's shirt will be presented by the person with the highest rank in the room. You will stand near the back. But, and this is the thing you're holding on to as sleep approaches, less near the back than yesterday. 4 months from now, if the Baronne de Richaud makes good on her implication, you might be in the middle of the room, looking through a different door at a different angle, and from there, if the years go well, if the alliances hold and the debts are repaid, and the king's attention moves in your direction at a useful moment, from there the door gets closer. This is the logic. This is how it works. The whole machine. All of it. The ceremonies, the linen, the perfume, the smell that everyone pretends not to notice, the chamber pots, and the night soil collectors and the fountains that only run for the king, all of it is in service of this logic. The slow, careful, expensive, completely consuming project of getting one step closer to the centre. And the centre is a man in a bedroom. A man in a bedroom who hasn't bathed since February, surrounded by the greatest concentration of wealth, artistry, power, and architectural ambition in the world, who smells, if you are standing close enough, like a human being, who is, underneath the wig and the heels and the ceremony and the 42 years of absolute rule, a human being. This is the final knowledge of Versailles, the one that takes years to accumulate, and that most people who live here never fully arrive at. The Sun King is a man. The ceremony is theatre. The smell is real. All of it, simultaneously and without contradiction. The beauty is real. The smell is real. The power is real. The decay is real. The linen is clean, and the corridors are not, and the gardens are magnificent, and the water tastes of algae, and the Hall of Mirrors is one of the most extraordinary spaces ever built by human hands. All of it simultaneously without contradiction. This is the thing Versailles teaches eventually to the people who live here long enough and pay attention carefully enough. The world is not simple. Power is not simple. Beauty is not simple. Cleanliness is not simple. Nothing is as it appears. Everything is exactly as it appears. Both. The candle on your table guts and dies. The room is dark. Through the small north window, the July sky is not completely black. There's a smear of clouds and the faint ambient glow of a half-moon somewhere above them, and the distant firelight of the stable lanterns in the Cour Royale. Versailles at night. Versailles never fully dark. The palace breathes around you. The stone, still warm from the day's sun, releasing heat into the rooms at a rate that makes sleep warm and slightly damp. The sounds, the distant kitchen, which runs late because tomorrow's meals require tonight's preparation. The occasional footstep in the corridor. Your feet are grateful. Your back is grateful. Your nose has finally actually stopped working for the night. Tomorrow, the cold cloth, the fresh linen, Gaston's efficient hands, the corridor and its layers, the salon de l'œil de bœuf with its 80 bodies. Tomorrow, the long performance of being someone who belongs in one of the most extraordinary buildings in the world. But that's tomorrow. Tonight there is just this. The warm room, the dark window, the sounds of 20,000 people in various stages of the night, all of them here, all of them engaged in the same complicated project of existing in relation to a king who hasn't bathed since February and who lives at the centre of more beauty than any human being in Europe. You close your eyes. The last smell you're aware of is the ghost of orange blossom on your wrists, the benzoin still doing its slow work of fixing the top notes. Then that fades too. Then there is just the night and the palace and the particular darkness of a room in the north wing in Versailles in the summer of 1685. And somewhere in the centre of everything, the king sleeps, and everything, the ceremonies, the halls, the fountains, the laundry, the night soil collectors, the perfumers, the gardeners, the valets and footmen and chamberlains, all of it continues all night in attendance on that fact. Versailles would remain the seat of French royal power until 1789, when the revolution would force Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette to return to Paris, the palace emptying of its inhabitants and most of its furnishings in the weeks that followed. The Hall of Mirrors, where the Sun King had walked among 20,000 candles, would later see the proclamation of the German Empire in 1871. History's habit of using spaces for purposes their builders never imagined. The smell problem was never solved. The palace today, restored and open to millions of visitors, smells of old stone and floor polish and the specific quality of air in spaces that have been breathed in by human beings for 350 years. Nothing of the original remains, olfactorily, except that somewhere in the stones, in the deep memory of the material, the linen theory and the perfume arms race and the night soil collectors and the 20,000 people breathing the same July air are present in the way that everything that happens in a place is somehow present in the place afterward. This Sun King is in the walls, as is everything else,